body on a quarterly basis. That concludes my report.
Thank you. Chris, Mr. Controller.
Good morning, Mayor.
Hollins.
Good morning, Mayor. Honorable members of council. I see a couple of empty chairs. I hope council members aren't caught in the same traffic on Memorial that Councilmember Peck and I were this morning. But Director Dubowski, thank you for going ahead of me this morning. Mayor, Council, I'm here today to present the monthly financial report for the month ending December 31st, 2025. The Controller's Office is projecting an ending fund balance of $336 million, or 13.2% of expenditures less debt service and pay-as-you-go for fiscal year 2026. This is $17.5 million lower than the projection of the Finance Department, with the difference being due to a lower revenue projection than Finance. Based on our current projections, the fund balance will be approximately $144.8 million above the city's target of holding 7.5% of total expenditures, excluding debt service and pay-as-you-go in reserve. Our revenue and expenditure projections remain unchanged from the November 2025 report for our general fund. For our enterprise funds, and starting with the Aviation Operating Fund, expenses increased by $1 million, primarily due to consulting services with the FAA, supporting grant-eligible airfield projects at the Houston Airport System. Additionally, operating transfers to the Airport Improvement Fund decreased by $1 million. Shifting now to our utility operations, within the Combined Utility System Fund, expenses decreased by $6.9 million, mainly due to personnel savings. Operating transfers also decreased by $15.6 million, driven by lower than anticipated debt payments and reduced transfers to capital projects. For our dedicated drainage and street renewal funds, within ad valorem, revenues increased by $3 million, largely due to higher interest income. Expenditures decreased by $5.2 million, primarily due to delays in vehicle purchases. Within the drainage charge fund, revenues increased by $4 million, also reflecting higher interest income. Within Metro et al., expenditures decreased by $3.9 million, driven by personnel savings. And within the Stormwater Fund, expenditures decreased by $12 million due to personnel savings, delays in vehicle purchases, and reduced transfers needed for the Building Inspection Special Fund. For our commercial paper and bonds, the city's practice has been to maintain no more than 20% of the total outstanding debt for each type of debt in a variable rate structure, which is in line with ratings agency guidance of no more than 25%. From time to time, the city's enterprise credits have exceeded this threshold on an interim basis, as they have undertaken large capital improvement projects or major expansions. As of December 31st, 2025, the ratio of unhedged variable rate debt for convention and entertainment was 48.08% due to the ongoing George R. Brown expansion. The ratio of unhedged variable rate debt for each other type of debt remains well below that 20% threshold. Now to our quarterly investment report. As of December 31st, 2025, the city had $6.5 billion invested in our general investment pool. The character of this pool is that of a short-term bond fund that holds investments of very high credit quality. Our investment strategy is to match assets and liabilities for a time period of 1 year into the future and to exercise discretion for the balance of remaining funds. Investments are $1.1 billion higher than this period last year. That's primarily attributable to new bond transactions in aviation, as well as the combined utility system. As of December 31st, 2025, the general investment pool was yielding 4%. In addition to the general investment pool, we have two small investment pools that total about $15 million. Those pools exist to comply with tax requirements of the federal government. A detailed listing of all the securities owned by the city appears at the back of your investments report. The city, along with our investment report, we've included the quarterly swap report as is required by the city's policy. The written swap report offers a comprehensive description of our two swap positions. the city had a net paid for the 6 months ending December 31st, 2025, from its swaps of $1.35 million. Fair value for both swaps as of December 31st, 2025, was negative $52 million, which is approximately $17 million greater than the prior quarter when it was at negative $69 million. The city swaps are fairly complex, and if you have questions regarding that report, please contact my office. Mayors, members of council, I'm joined today by Miss Allison Cranbull, who's a junior at Heights High School. Later this month, we'll also have a junior from Sharpstown High School, Navir Graham, who will join us, and both of them are our controllers for a day for spring 2026. As you all know, the Controller for a Day program was designed to give young people firsthand exposure to public service, civic leadership, and financial accountability in civic government. Allison and Navir were selected through an essay competition where they each expounded on the importance of fiscal responsibility in government, which is something I definitely was not thinking about as a junior in high school. Allison, hey. Would you like to say a few words?
Yes. Hello, my name is Allison Cranbull from Heights High School, and I'm the Houston City Controller for the day. In my winning essay, I wrote about how fiscal responsibility and public trust go hand in hand, and I compared that relationship to a plant. I believe that fiscal responsibility is the work you put in for the plant to grow, like planning, budgeting, and making careful decisions. Then public trust is what grows from that effort. Today, I plan to continue to grow my understanding of the Office of the Controller and use my time to learn about city government. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Allison. We're really honored to have her with us today and look forward to welcoming Navir later this month. Mayor and Council, I'd also like to quickly remind you of our Black History program coming up February 19th in the Legacy Room. Each of you should have received a personal invitation, and we're really excited. We're going to be honoring some legends this year. First off, Yolanda Adams, renowned gospel artist, also Rice University President Reginald DeRoche, Houston Texans head coach D'Amico Ryans, as well as his wife Jamila Ryans, who together they're the founders of the Ryan Family Foundation, and then also United Airlines pilots Jamil and Jalal Paul. Finally, we'll also pay tribute to the life and legacy of the Honorable Sylvester Turner with the posthumous Legacy Award. And so we hope to see you all there on the morning of February 19th. Over the last month, events in Minnesota have shown us the dangerous consequences of an overly militarized approach to immigration enforcement. The names Renee Good, Alex Peretti, and 5-year-old Liam Ramos are now known nationally for all the wrong reasons. And sadly, these are not isolated incidents. When enforcement is driven by ideology instead of sound judgment, families are torn apart, communities are destabilized, local businesses and regional economies suffer, and trust in government erodes. Across the state of Texas, we're already seeing the economic consequences. Just last month, a concrete company in South Texas was forced to file for bankruptcy after federal immigration raids disrupted its workforce and created acute labor shortages. Houston is also not immune. Local restaurants have been impacted and had their operations disrupted. Construction projects are being delayed, and uncertainty about market conditions has kept some developments from moving forward altogether. In a city where 1 in 4 residents is an immigrant, cooperating with ICE beyond what the law requires does not make our city safer or stronger. It fuels fear, it weakens community trust, it undermines public safety, and it strains our local economy. Now, we know that these national choices are being made far outside of this city hall, but the consequences do land right here in Houston neighborhoods, in our workforce, and on our balance sheet. And that brings me to the fiscal responsibility that is within our control. Overtime is often necessary, but when it goes unmanaged or underestimated, it becomes a structural budget problem with lasting consequences that weaken Houston's long-term financial stability. Yesterday, my office shared insights about the city's overtime trends and costs with the Budget and Fiscal Affairs Committee. In short, the city is dramatically over budget in its overtime spending, with police, fire, and solid waste as the major contributors. Solid waste is projected to be 70% over budget, while police and fire are projected to be 89% and 87% over budget, respectively. Together, these three departments are projected to come in more than $54 million over budget in their overtime spending. This predicament was entirely foreseeable. Last spring, we reported to you that those three departments were on pace to go over budget by $70 million. Our projections at that time turned out to be 99.6% accurate. And it was clear at that time, and we shared with you at that time, that there were only two reasonable options. Either work to control overtime or acknowledge the necessity of that overtime and budget for that necessity. As we moved through budget seasons, we came back to you once again, and we advised you in our 10 Hard Truths document, verbatim, that the fiscal year 2026 budget repeated last year's overtime miscalculation, and it was likely to lead to another massive overage. That was hard truth number 6 in that document if you're searching for it. But instead of increasing the overtime budget, you reduced it. So here we are again, with a deficit that started at $76 million and ballooned to $127 million with your property tax decision, which was also entirely foreseeable and described in hard truth number 2 during last year's budget season. We're now looking at draining our fund balance an additional $50+ million because we'd rather ignore basic facts than make hard decisions. I'm stressing the point of predictability because for 2 of these 3 departments, police and solid waste, overtime is trending very close to what you would expect based on the last 5 years. HPD is projected at $28 million of general fund overtime with a 5-year average of $29.5 million. It's right where you might expect it to be. Solid waste is projected at $6.9 million with a 5-year average of $7 million. It's right where you would expect it to be. And so these numbers are not shocking. The outlier here is fire. The fire department's overtime is projected at $82 million, which is nearly 40% higher than the 5-year average. In fact, the 2 years since the new fire contract was signed have seen the most overtime in the city's history. I'll repeat today what I told you last year. Either overtime is excessive and must be brought under control, or this overtime reflects the true cost of the current contract and must be budgeted honestly. Pretending that it's neither is how a budget fails a basic test of credibility, which the fiscal year 2026 budget has now done on several accounts. That's not a good thing. At a time when the majority of ratings agencies have Houston on a negative outlook, it undermines confidence in our fiscal planning and management. And it's not good for Houstonians who can't be expected to trust what the city tells them if in critical instances what we tell them turns out to be fiction. Fiscal responsibility ultimately comes down to credibility, credible assumptions, credible budgets, credible leadership. And until overtime is either controlled or honestly accounted for, then Houston will continue paying the price for plans that don't line up with reality. Thank you, and that concludes my report.
Mr. Pollard.
Thank you, Mayor, and good morning to everyone. Thank you both for your reports. The controller kind of highlighted some of the things, Director, that I was going to speak to specifically with overtime. To my recollection, we budgeted less overtime dollars for HPD in this current budget than we did the previous fiscal year, even though they went way over their budgeted amount. Is that accurate?
So when we did the budget for FY26, the budget for overtime is approximately on level with the adopted budget for fiscal year 25. It's true that the FY26 adopted budget is below where the FY25 actuals ended up being for overtime specifically. when we talk about the budget, and I know you and I had some conversation at the time of the budget last spring, we also look at the entire budget of the department. So, for example, in the police department, last year in fiscal year 25, even though their overtime budget exceeded their adopted budget for overtime, they had savings in other areas. Base pay savings, non-personnel savings that offset the majority of the overtime savings. And so when we set the budget, although you have to look at each line item, we also look at the department as a whole. So we don't want to over budget for a department. I hate to say if you over budget, they'll spend it all, right? But we look at the totality of the department when we budget. And so as we see where we have savings in some of those areas to offset that overtime, that's something we focus on. I completely hear the controller's point on the fire department, and the solid waste department has less savings to offset. A lot of that this year is due to the success that the departments have had in the recruitment and the retention, which was something that each of those chiefs and department director highlighted in the committee presentation yesterday. So as we move towards the end of the fiscal year, we will have to assess how much savings we have in those other areas to offset the overtime.
And I think we need to look at it even before then. Now we have to see what these projections are and where the trends are and start to possibly put caps on the amount of overtime that is offered based on necessity. Because as you mentioned, if we budget a lot for overtime, many times that pot of money is there and people are incentivized to try to work as much as possible to earn more pay. But when we don't budget properly, and we don't hit those marks, then we have to find a way to fill in the gap. And then if we don't, then our deficit grows. So,
well, just on the point of the deficit growing, one thing that the major metric that the rating agencies look at, like the controller mentioned, is how our fund balance is. And when we, focusing on fiscal year 25, there was more overtime than we budgeted for. But the overall fiscal year 25 budget, when we adopted the budget, the fund balance was at 10%. We ended the year, even with all that additional overtime, we ended the year at 14% fund balance. So an improvement of 40%. And so that speaks to, yes, there is overtime above budget, but there are savings in other areas coupled together with, on the revenue side, we typically, and you see in the sales tax, we typically budget fairly conservatively in our revenue areas to make sure that we have enough cushion for some of these impacts as we go through the year.
Understood, and I think that's great that it happened that way, but there could be scenarios where it doesn't, and then the city is not in a financial strong position as it ended up being after the last budget year, based on some of those things that happened towards the end that we're able to find some cost savings. So when you're budgeting from the outset, you can't really rely on some of these scenarios that may or may not happen. I can tell you from my office's standpoint, as I've mentioned many times before, as it relates to overtime with HPD, my office is even getting blocked from even providing overtime dollars. So while we're putting a strain on the overall general fund for overtime dollars, in J City, when we have dollars to spend that are allocated, that are budgeted for overtime pay, this administration has chosen not to even accept those dollars. And that's fiscal mismanagement. And I think we have to be able to look at all sources of funding and all sources of dollars that could be put forth towards overtime that our council offices have to offset some of these general fund costs.
And I would like to understand a little bit more because Councilmember Thomas had some questions for Chief Harden yesterday at the committee meeting regarding that. And so I definitely would like to get a better understanding of that because Chief Harden yesterday, and I don't want to speak for you, Councilmember Thomas, but I feel what Chief Harden yesterday relayed to the council member is that, of course, we we'll need to work with the individual council members on those needs for those areas. So I'm never going to say no to using your council district service money for something we need.
My constituents would like to see the money be allocated for additional presence due to overtime. So I'd love to speak with you about it.
Thank you.
Councilman Kamen.
Thank you, Mayor. Good morning. Director, I know we say, and we talked a little bit about this yesterday, we're seeing savings in other places. Sometimes, though, savings means cuts. Sometimes savings means efficiencies. So are we able to get a better description on where we are seeing those savings? And it doesn't have to be today, but again, I want to, we say we're saving more to offset, but what is that? What is the impact of that department in terms of other services that we're providing? Second, because we had such limited time yesterday, we touched on it, but it's my understanding we talked about Winter Storm Enzo was not a federally or state declared disaster. So the city itself incurred those costs. We then had the freeze 2 weekends ago, and rightfully so, Houston stepped up in true form. Right, we stood up the warming centers. We deployed additional resources. It is a massive undertaking that I don't think people realize how much goes into that, how much personnel, how much overtime. What was the cost? Do we know yet the cost of last weekend? And then we also had to do it this past weekend. Again, I'm not saying we shouldn't do that, but there's a cost associated, especially when we're not getting reimbursed for it.
So the cost, we're on a little bit of a lag because of when payroll runs, right? For overtime and some of those things, the way we track them. But in general, for the warming centers, it's about $1 million for every day that we have the warming centers open. At least that's our experience from the previous year. Now, last year in fiscal year 25, again, like I mentioned, when we proposed the 25 budget, we were at 10% fund balance. We ended at 14% fund balance, and those costs were absorbed within the department's budgets. Because of other savings. And to touch on your point where the other savings comes from, predominantly it's vacancy savings for positions that are not filled, where each department director is looking through, what they need to provide the services in their department. And you'll see a lot of that reflected. I know I talk a lot about general appropriations is coming. That's in April, and that's where we really true up the estimates to the budget.
Right. Going back to the $1 million a day estimate, is that inclusive of additional departments needs, like, there's a warming center cost, but there's other costs affiliated with severe weather, right, and deployment, additional road treatments, whatever that is that an all-encompassing $1 million to the city?
We can get you the details on it.
Okay. Yeah. I would appreciate that, because I bring it up, again, we've had voted out of unanimously BFA, the budget amendment from 8 months ago related to the budget stabilization fund and increasing that amount. We had a commitment that we would be increasing that amount, but we haven't seen that item come up. So I want to keep pushing, because, again, we're seeing more and more extreme weather events related to climate change. But we cannot rely on state and federal reimbursement. And we need to be planning for that. So I really wanted, do you have an update on when we'll see that item?
So the items that came out of that committee meeting, your item was part of it. There were some other items on the CIP, so it definitely requires collaboration with some of the other departments. So we're meeting internally to talk about, when we can bring it forward for the next steps. But the budget amendment specifically on the $25 million, the 1% or $20 million going to 1% or $25 million, that's absolutely something we're supportive of. The 365-day time period to refill the budget stabilization fund is one that I know we talked a lot during the budget time, but that's one where we do see challenges with that, where if we don't get federal reimbursement timely to refill the stabilization fund, it will have to come from the general fund balance. So it's really kind of, moving money from one pocket to another, for lack of better word.
And I know we don't necessarily see eye to eye on that, but I think it deserves that conversation around the horseshoe and the item being brought up.
Thank you.
So, thank you very much.
Very good. Thank you. Councilman Flickinger.
Just want to make sure I understand the conversation correctly that occurred a few minutes ago. I mean, basically you're saying the bond rating agencies are not going to look at the individual geocodes to see whether there's discrepancy in budget versus actual, and what they're really going to look at is the fund balance at the end of the year?
They follow the MOFAR report. They look at the ACFR. I've never had a question about which GL line tallied to what.
Thank you.
Just to
Councilmember Alcorn.
Sorry, Mayor. Councilmember Flickinger, and I think this speaks to something that you asked as well, Councilmember Kamen. Fund balance did not go up last year, to be clear.
Didn't go up.
I think what Director Dabowski was describing was projections about the fund balance. And so what was projected was a very large deficit. What we got was still a very large deficit, the largest in Houston's history, but it was smaller than what was originally projected. And so as ratings agencies are looking at that, what they're seeing is the largest deficit in Houston's history.
Councilmember Alcorn.
Thank you. And I think the discussion on overtime has been good because I heard some good things come from the department directors yesterday about they're really focused on it now. Police, I really liked what he had to say about what Chief Harden was saying about during these disasters, we're looking at on-duty, officers. We're trying to really strategically put on-duty people so you don't have to use more overtime. And they are tracking under what they've been doing in the past. So I think people are being more strategic in the departments. Chief Munoz talked about, in each of the presentations, as you mentioned, Director Dabowski, there was a attrition and hiring, and we're finally not underwater there anymore. So we're having more people out, which should help with overtime also. And Chief Munoz was able to talk about how now there still is high overtime because now people are going to training, we're getting more paramedics, things that we needed to do. Also, I heard Director Hassan talk about things he's doing and looking at it. And while the numbers are still above what we had adopted in the budget, and I think we all understood that was going to be fluctuating due to circumstances, I also felt like there was some good news coming out of how they're looking at deploying their FTEs. Also some good news in, I think that Chief Harden or maybe you, Melissa, said civilian savings is going to help some in HPD to cover that cost. I agree on the sales tax. We way under, like we may under budget overtime, we under budget sales tax revenue. So I think we're going to be the way I see it, it looks like we're going to be okay. But I like the attention that the directors are giving into not just anybody who wants overtime can work overtime. I mean that seems to be not a thing anymore. So I appreciate that.
Thank you. There's a lot of good news coming out of our directors, and they're being very strategic. And if you look at the three departments that are requiring overtime, police, fire, and solid waste, I think that's where Houstonians expect us to provide those services. And as Councilman Kamen mentioned, the two warming centers brought about additional expenses. We had 2 police officers at each of the 12 warming centers, plus 2 medical assistants from the fire department. So, some people may choose to attack those services and those personnel, but we know what we're doing, and there's a lot of good news coming out of each of the departments, and we will have a balanced budget without raising taxes this spring. So thank you for everyone's participation. Councilmember Pollard. Thank you,
Mayor. I still believe we have a spending problem here. I feel like we spend more than we bring in. And now when we talk about overtime and the amount of overtime that is going over budget, plus, the $53 million that we had to absorb based on the tax rate that was different than what we budgeted for in the budget. When you put forth your 5-year forecast, you had like a baseline, an optimistic, and a pessimistic. Based on these changes just for this fiscal year alone, are we on baseline still? Or are we at an optimistic, pessimistic? Like, where are we trending for this 5-year forecast? Because each year you give an estimate of where we may be. So is this making things worse? Or is this baseline? I can't see how it's optimistic.
No, I would say that we're still at the baseline. And you're right, and the controller is correct that we didn't have a surplus budget in fiscal year 25, right? We drew less from the fund balance than we were planning to at the time of the budget. And this is, I feel like I sound like a broken record, but this is the story that we've had for as long as any of us can remember, right? That we have had a structural deficit. A lot of things have happened, right? We've made a lot of progress. We had the pension reform, back in 2017. That has saved us hundreds of millions of dollars a year in the general fund that we would have otherwise had to put towards it. We had the OPEB reform. That's also bringing down our long-term liabilities and allowing us to save for the future. This year with the Ernst & Young study, the way we proposed the budget, we for the first time in the recent past have seen a year-over-year decrease in the expenditure budget versus talking about how much are we going to increase the budget by. So we completely agree with you that we have a spending problem, right? That's why we engaged Ernst & Young. That's why we're looking for the efficiencies. That's why we did the retirement incentive program, the consolidation, having each department look at their org chart, their span of control. And so over the last year, we've made a lot of progress, right? It's not perfect, right? But we're a lot farther along than where we were a year ago. And so we're going to continue to work.
So when the controller mentions that over the past 2 years we've had the largest deficits, well, okay, where will we be where are we on trend to be this year? Are we on trend to be one of the largest deficits in the city's history? You've already mentioned that based on where we are currently, your 5-year forecast is still on the baseline projection,
right,
which would put us at almost $500 million in 2030. That's what your chart showed, right? So that's going in the wrong direction. So the question would bear to ask, what do we need to do to go in the optimistic direction that we're not doing now?
We're going to continue on with a lot of the things that we discovered through the Ernst & Young study. The consolidations, right, are ongoing. We also have the category management initiative. That's one that is in this budget, and we had an update from the Chief Procurement Officer yesterday at the committee meeting to talk about how that process is going. But that's a multi-year effort, right? That's going to allow us to have savings on contracts citywide. It's going to impact the general fund, but other funds as well. So that's something we need to continue on to try to, get the same services, but hopefully negotiate better pricing with our outside partners. So definitely see, continuing on with that. And that's going to be a major initiative.
It just seems like these big $54, $53 million hits are going to add up to start pushing us to the pessimistic line.
Where we're going to end fiscal year 26 is right on par with where we ended 25 as far as our percent of fund balance. We ended 25 with a 14% fund balance. Right now we're projecting to end 26 with a 14% fund balance. Yes, we're going to increase our estimate for overtime, but we're going to have other savings in other areas. And together with what Councilmember Alcorn mentioned, looking to increase our projection on our revenues in the coming months.
So that's why you say it's safe to say we'll stay at the baseline.
Kind of the baseline,
right,
yes,
thank
sir.
you.
Member Martinez.
Thank you, Mayor. And Director, I just want to say, it's okay to be a broken record because, unfortunately, and I think at the end of the day, we need to continue to highlight what's been done. We've known, and I go to civic clubs. I started my civic club tour this week. On average, 150 million was the case for the 10 years prior. Yes, it's a bit higher now, but we are consolidating, different divisions, whether it's HR, whether it's procurement, and now we're looking at contract negotiations. We're moving in the right direction, and I think this doom and gloom of, the sky is falling. The sky's been where it's at for the last 10 years already, at least minimum. And I feel hopeful that as we continue to exhaust all options, I still want to keep pressing on where the revenues are going to come. and I've been speaking to a trash fee. Definitely need to take a look at the revenue cap as well. And these are tough decisions. But at the same time, I also want to make sure that we're not putting out this rhetoric that, we're at a place that we've never been before. There's folks around this horseshoe that have been dealing with the deficit for 4 years when they were in office already. So I appreciate the conversation that we had yesterday. I appreciate the departments looking at how they address overtime. HPD is doing a heck of a job. I want to commend them for doing what they're doing with the resources that they have. We also need to look at some policies when it comes to HFD as well, for sure. And to know, and I think Houstonians need to know, when we open up a warming center, $1 million, that's something that we're not thinking about trying to open up, but we need to ensure that Houstonians are safe. And so I just want to say I appreciate the conversation that we had yesterday, even the one that we're having around the horseshoe now. But these tough decisions ultimately need to be made. But we are moving in the right direction when we start looking at operation, right-sizing departments, ultimately. And so continue to be a broken record. I'm okay with it. I think everybody needs to hear about it as well, all of Houstonians.
Anyone else?
Martinez, the facts are that these 2 fiscal years have the highest
That's understood, and I
drawdown
think
of the fund
that's understood,
balance
Controller, and I
in
get
the
that.
history of the city
And
of
I've heard you
Houston.
say that as well. I get it, but we also need to make sure that we talk about what we're doing as well, and what we're doing to consolidate what we're doing that works. And I would hope that you would also be on board to highlight those wins as well. Thank you.
Or come up with a plan. Councilmember Ramirez.
Mayor,
Hey,
as I have
please
multiple
wait
times.
and let me call. We have business to conduct. Councilman Ramirez.
Mayor, you made a comment towards me. I'm going to respond to that.
No, I have not made a comment towards you. I'm saying, as we go forward, we need to have a plan. Councilman Ramirez.
I agree with you. And I stand ready to work with you and your team to develop that plan.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. My takeaway from yesterday was overtime costs continue to be at a level none of us want to see. Obviously, public safety is priority number one, and we need to take care of that function. The last 2 years we passed nice new contracts for police and fire, and at some point that has to translate into lower overtime. We have more police officers today. They're doing a great job in recruiting. We have more firefighters. But at some point, that has to result in lower overtime. And to address my colleague's comment that we need a garbage fee, it's really tough, I think, for the public to accept that we need a garbage fee when our overtime costs are so high. Because when our overtime costs are so high, that's an indication that there's room for improvement. And there's a disconnect in my mind saying we need more money when some people are going to look at that and say we need to spend the money that we have more wisely. And I understand there are tremendous challenges. We're working on them. We're making progress. But I think the voters will be skeptical of more fees when we're not being as efficient and effective with the money we have. So that's my thought.
I think you're spot on, Councilmember Ramirez. When we tell Houstonians how much something is going to cost, we need to be telling them an accurate number. And on this overtime issue in particular, when we see that the overtime figures are what they are, and it's year over year, and again, I'm not questioning the operational leaders on if that overtime is necessary or not. My assumption, although we are going through audits for all of these departments going forward, is that the overtime is necessary at a base level. The challenge is that we're telling Houstonians overtime is going to cost us this much, when we know at the time that we're doing it that overtime is going to be significantly more than that. If we have not made any operational changes that are meaningfully going to drive overtime down, then overtime is going to remain the same and potentially go up. If we know that at the time of budgeting, then we can't put a fictional number in the budget just to be having this conversation 6 months later when we all knew that these numbers were going to turn out directionally like this. And so, yes, I agree with you. Before we go to Houstonians and say, hey, we need you to pony up more cash to fund this critical service, we should know how much, providing world-class service costs. And then when we say that number needs to be a true number that Houstonians can expect will be the actual outcome just a few months later after we write it into a budget document. So I'm with you on that statement.
So I think, and to echo Councilmember Alcorn's point, I think what we heard at the BFA committee yesterday is not that, the controller says, well, if you're not making any changes, but that's not what we heard at the committee meeting yesterday. The directors have made operational changes to, deploy staff to try to minimize overtime in those certain areas. And so that was definitely part of our, part of our robust discussion yesterday.
If you were to sit with senior uniform leaders during budget season in 2025, which I did, and ask them, do you expect overtime to go down, which I did, they would have said no, which is what they told me.
Councilmember Davis.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Comptroller and Finance Director. The interest and the concern about the overtime fee is absolutely concerning to the entire city. But I do recall that people questioning the effect of when overtime is done. But I do recall several years ago, there was a raise of police several years back to confront the issue of the growing crime in our city, and it was used by allocating overtime. So allocation of overtime is nothing new to this council. It's been done years before when everything, we can't project, no one can project what the outcome of what confrontation or some disaster we're going to have. No more than they projected when COVID hit. You understand? So I think what I heard from department heads on yesterday was an approach to make some differences and some changes. There was a lot of projections made about some of the money that we wouldn't get last year, but we did get. So I think the concern is admirable. I really do. I respect that in regards to the area of overtime. But I think listening to the directors, some changes have been made, and I think they're flowing with the administration about how we approach the overtime issues. But what can cause an overtime effect, I don't think any of us have a crystal ball about how we deal with that, just long as the areas that overtime is spent, like the fire department. When Chief Munoz spoke about that, we got more firefighters, but at the same time, there was money spent in regards to EMS, and when those people go into training, it leaves a vacancy. And so you got to use common sense to fulfill the responsibility to serve in the city. So I think it should be looked at, but I also think that, it takes something to try to project what can happen in the very future. So, it is what it is.
Councilmember, I agree with you that these overtime figures are nothing new, and I agree with you that we should be using common sense. Since these overtime figures are nothing new, we should look at past performance to, in some way, predict, future outcomes. And if you look at the overtime figures for solid waste, for police in particular, where overtime is tracking is directly in line with where overtime has been. In terms of what the operational leaders are doing, our report yesterday highlighted some of the solutions that have been put in place, or at least have been attempted. They noted that those haven't brought the overtime down in ways that were expected or promised. But we do want to acknowledge in writing, and I'll acknowledge it verbally here, that attempts are being made to address this issue.
Thank you. Thank you, Melissa. Excellent job. Next.
We need a motion to accept the report, please.
Councilman Alcorn.
I move that we accept the quarterly financial report dated December 31st, 2025.
Second, Castillo.
Motion made and second. All in favor say yes. Those opposed, no. Motion passes.